You regret marrying her?
Absolutely. I said to her in one of my text messages to her, because she didn't respond because I kept asking her, why did you file for a divorce? And she wouldn't say anything.
Fantasizing about what it could have been. Because when you have a marriage like mine that felt so perfect, you often fantasize about how perfect it could have been and what you could have done different. And I'm okay now with how everything is.
I later figured out this felt like a coup. Sent her a text message. I said this was a $5 million rehab project that I targeted from day one for financial reasons. Getting engaged in 30 days, I mean, who does that? I was out of my 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 goddamn mind to have done that. And of course, I'm paying dearly for it.
When you think of reality TV drama, you expect shade, secrets, and maybe a few wigs flying. But Porsha Williams' divorce from Simon Gobadia? Baby, this isn't just Bravo-level mess. It's turning into one of the nastiest financial wars reality TV has ever seen. We're talking prenups, deportations, fraud whispers, and lawsuits that could cost over $100 million. What started as a whirlwind romance with diamond rings and a $7 million mansion has now spiraled into a courtroom saga with receipts, betrayal, and enough scandal to keep the blogs fed for years. And the craziest part? Both Porsha and Simon are playing offense. Meaning this isn't just about love lost, it's about survival, money, and reputation. When most celebrity breakups hit the blogs, the drama is messy but predictable. Cheating scandals, Instagram shade, maybe a custody battle or two. But Porsha Williams' split from Simon Gobadia? This is not your average Bravo breakup. What we're watching unfold isn't just a divorce. It's a full-blown war. One that's worth more than $100 million, tangled up in fraud whispers, deportation scandals, and reputations that may never recover. Think about it. Porsha isn't just walking into court asking for spousal support or a bigger slice of the mansion. She's demanding 9 figures, accusing Simon of wrecking her finances, sabotaging her career, and leaving her scrambling to rebuild the empire she worked for on The Real Housewives of Atlanta. And that alone would have been enough to keep fans glued to their screens. But add in Simon being detained, deported, and tied to fraud allegations that have followed him for years, and suddenly this looks less like a divorce case and more like a Netflix true crime doc waiting to happen. The stakes couldn't be higher. Porsha is fighting to prove she was manipulated, left broke, and forced back into reality TV just to survive. Meanwhile, Simon is fighting not just for his money, but for his image, his freedom, and whatever scraps of credibility he has left after being dragged through the mud. And let's be real, in Hollywood, your name is worth more than your bank account. Once your brand collapses, so does your income. That's what makes this battle different. It's not just about who gets the mansion, the cars, or the checks. It's about who survives the fallout with their career intact. Porsha is betting on sympathy and receipts. Simon is betting on spin and countersuits. And in the middle of it all is a legal war so explosive it could cost Simon everything, and either make or break Porsha's entire second act. So buckle up, because this isn't just a divorce. This is financial warfare, reputation warfare, and emotional warfare all rolled into one. And by the time the dust settles, at least one of them is walking away with nothing but ashes. To really understand how this $100 million war started, we have to rewind back to the beginning, because the love story that brought Porsha and Simon together was just as fast as it was suspicious. 1 minute, fans were still watching Porsha navigate life after Dennis, the father of her child. The next minute, she's flashing a massive rock on Instagram and announcing her engagement to Simon Gobadia, a man most people only knew as the estranged husband of her fellow Real Housewives of Atlanta castmate, Fallon. That alone had the internet in shambles. An engagement in just 30 days? To your friend's ex-husband? This wasn't just a plot twist. It was a scandal baked into reality TV gold. But while the headline screamed whirlwind romance, behind the scenes, business was being handled. A prenup was drafted. A prenup that would end up being the match that lit the fuse for everything we're seeing now. On paper, it looked clean. Porsha secured the right to keep her luxury lifestyle intact if things ever went left. That meant alimony, luxury cars, and even access to Simon's $7 million mansion. At the time, it felt like just another celebrity couple dotting their I's and crossing their T's. But in hindsight, that contract was a ticking time bomb. Fast forward to the divorce filing, and suddenly Simon was crying foul. He swore he never would have signed the prenup if he'd known Porsha wasn't really leaving reality TV behind. According to Simon, Porsha promised she was done with the drama, finished with Bravo checks, and ready to live a quiet life with him. But then, boom, she pops back up on Real Housewives of Atlanta season 16, peach in hand, cameras rolling, and the Bravo checks cashing once again. To Simon, that was a betrayal. He claimed she tricked him into a prenup under false pretenses. But the court wasn't buying it. Judges don't deal in feelings. They deal in paperwork. And the paperwork was clear. That prenup held strong. And Porsha walked away with $40,000 per month in alimony for 15 months, her Rolls-Royce secured, her legal fees covered, and the right to stay in the $7 million mansion until 2027. For most people, that would sound like a win. But here's where the cracks started to show. See, to a woman who's used to six-figure spending every month just to maintain a lifestyle, $40,000 wasn't nearly enough. And more importantly, Porsha felt like Simon had already been playing games with her money, manipulating accounts, dodging obligations, and leaving her to fend for herself. That's when her team began building the case that would turn into today's monster lawsuit. And this is why the prenup was never just a contract. It was the fuse. From the moment the judge enforced it, the lines were drawn. Porsha had her legal win, but she also had a reason to come back swinging harder. Simon felt played, tricked, and embarrassed, while Porsha felt shortchanged, manipulated, and left to pick up the pieces. That clash of perspectives is exactly what transformed a messy divorce into a full-on financial war. The whirlwind engagement was the spark. The prenup was the fuse. And now, the explosion is playing out for the whole world to see. If the prenup was the fuse, then Simon's scandals were the gasoline poured right on top of it. Because just when you thought this was going to be your standard messy divorce with a few reality TV twists, Simon's past came crashing into the present, turning a personal breakup into a global headline. Earlier this year, Simon's name wasn't trending for luxury cars or flashy vacations. It was trending because immigration officials detained him, dug into his history, and ultimately deported him back to Nigeria. That wasn't just a random paperwork mix-up, either. For years, whispers have followed Simon about shady business dealings, credit card scams, bank fraud, shell companies, you name it. The man had a reputation that never fully washed clean, and now suddenly it was all resurfacing right in the middle of his divorce battle with Porsha. Now, think about that timing. On one hand, Simon is in divorce court, claiming he's the victim of a tricky prenup and a wife who blindsided him. On the other hand, TMZ, Page 6, and every gossip blog alive are running stories about fraud, ICE, and deportation. Judges are human, too. They read headlines, they hear the chatter, and whether they admit it or not, all of that noise seeps into the courtroom. And here's where Porsha's legal team played it smart. They didn't even have to dig for dirt. Simon's own life was handing them ammunition on a silver platter. When you're arguing over millions of dollars in assets, credibility is everything. You have to convince a judge you're trustworthy, that you honor your contracts, that you're financially responsible. But how do you do that when the same week you're testifying about fairness in a prenup, the feds are shipping you out of the country under suspicion of fraud? It's impossible. For Porsha's lawyers, this was like Christmas morning. They could point to the headlines and say, "Look, Your Honor, this isn't just a bitter ex trying to smear a man. This is a documented pattern of shady behavior." And it worked in their favor, because suddenly Simon didn't just look like a jilted husband. He looked like a man who couldn't be trusted with money, contracts, or even his own immigration paperwork. Meanwhile, Porsha leaned into the narrative. She painted herself as the woman who gave her all to a man who wasn't just controlling, but dangerous to her financial and personal stability. And honestly, the optics were on her side. While Simon was stuck overseas trying to scrub his image, Porsha was standing in court saying, "He didn't just break my heart, he broke my bank account and dragged my name through the mud." And with every new headline about fraud and deportation, her claim hit harder. This is where the war shifted. The prenup may have given her an early win, but Simon's immigration and fraud scandals gave her the upper hand. They weren't just gossip, they were credibility killers. And in a divorce this messy, the court of public opinion matters just as much as the actual court filings. Simon wanted to fight for his fortune, but how can you fight for money when the world sees you as broke, shady, and not even allowed to live in the country? The fallout from those scandals didn't just damage Simon's brand. It set Porsha up to frame herself as the true victim, fighting to protect her daughter and her livelihood from a man whose empire was crumbling right in front of us. And that's when this stopped being about who left who. It became a battle over who the world would believe. By this point, Simon's image was already hanging by a thread. The prenup battle left him bruised. The deportation scandal shredded his credibility, and Porsha's $100 million lawsuit was painting him as the villain in a story everyone wanted to watch. So what does Simon do? Instead of laying low, regrouping, or trying to clean up his name, he went on the attack. And not just any attack. He filed a federal defamation lawsuit against Porsha, demanding damages over something most people would have laughed off with a glass of wine and a shady clapback. The entire case was built on a handful of Instagram posts. Posts where Porsha threw a little shade and implied that her ex might be struggling in the bedroom. Yes, y'all, Simon sued Porsha over erectile dysfunction rumors. While Porsha was talking about millions in assets, financial sabotage, and emotional distress, Simon's lawyers were in court saying, "Your Honor, her Instagram hurt his feelings." According to Simon's team, the posts weren't just jokes. They argued that Porsha's hints about him being weak in the bedroom were intentionally crafted to humiliate him and that the embarrassment cost him business opportunities, sponsorships, and damaged his reputation worldwide. They put in writing, erectile dysfunction was allegedly messing with his money. Now here's where it gets messy. Porsha's lawyers immediately hit back, saying she never mentioned him by name and that some of the posts were even framed as men's health awareness. Technically, she could argue it was a PSA, not a jab at her ex. But come on, everybody with Wi-Fi knew exactly who she was talking about. The timing, the shade, the delivery, it all lined up too perfectly. But here's the bigger picture. Compared to a $100 million lawsuit, a defamation claim over IG shade looked downright petty. Think about it. Simon was claiming he was manipulated into a prenup, arguing that he lost millions unfairly, all while being deported and accused of fraud. Yet at the same time, he was suing Porsha over some sly posts about bedroom struggles. To the court and to the public, it felt contradictory. If your image is already sinking under fraud allegations and deportation headlines, how much credibility do you really gain by crying about Instagram memes? Instead of flipping the script, Simon's counterattack backfired. It made him look less like a victim of Porsha's plotting and more like a bitter ex reaching for anything to hit back with. Worse, it played right into Porsha's narrative that Simon was manipulative, controlling, and using money and lawsuits as weapons to keep her. Under pressure, the man who claimed he was blindsided by a setup marriage was now asking the courts to punish his ex over memes. The contradictions wrote themselves. And that's the thing about this counterattack. It wasn't just weak, it was revealing. It showed just how desperate Simon was to claw back some kind of control, even if it meant taking the fight to places that looked ridiculous compared to the massive stakes of the real lawsuit. Porsha's team didn't even have to do much. All they had to say was, "Judge, look, this man is suing over Instagram shade while my client is suing because she lost millions, a stable home, and her career opportunities." One of those arguments carries real weight. The other just sounds like petty Bravo drama. And in a war this big, the petty plays don't win. They expose you. At this point in the war, Simon had already been hit with a 1-2 punch. The prenup that boxed him in and the deportation scandal that wrecked his credibility. But the fatal blow? That came from Simon himself. Because in a battle this public, Sometimes the worst evidence against you doesn't come from leaked documents or secret recordings. It comes straight out of your own mouth. Instead of staying silent, Simon decided to talk. And not just talk. He gave interviews, sat for podcasts, and went on his own Instagram lives. And with every word, he was writing Porsha's legal strategy for her. In one interview, he flat out admitted regret, calling his marriage to Porsha a mistake from the beginning. He painted himself as a man blindsided, manipulated, and, in his words, set up for failure. But here's the problem. When you're in court trying to prove you were the reasonable one, admitting that you never truly believed in the marriage undercuts everything. If you thought it was a mistake, then why sign the prenup? Why buy the mansion? Why roll out the Rolls Royce and private jets for Instagram? His own contradictions made him look unstable, bitter, and unreliable. But the most damning line of all came when Simon described Porsha not as a partner, not as a wife, but as what he called a $5 million rehab project. Let that sink in. He essentially reduced his ex-wife, a woman with her own brand, her own career, and her own following, to a broken project that he poured money into to fix. Those words weren't just cruel, they were incriminating. Because in a divorce where Porsha is arguing she endured emotional distress, financial manipulation, and a controlling husband, nothing paints that picture clearer than the man himself casually calling her a rehab project with a price tag. To Porsha's legal team, this was gold. They didn't need to exaggerate or spin anything. They could just play the clip, roll the tape, and let Simon convict himself in the court of public opinion. His words showed not only a lack of respect for his marriage, but a deep contempt for Porsha herself. That kind of language is exactly what you use to prove emotional harm, psychological abuse, and toxic control. And let's be honest, the optics couldn't be worse. Simon, the man already facing deportation and fraud rumors, now looked like a bitter ex who publicly demeaned the woman he once promised to protect. Porsha, on the other hand, came off as the strong survivor. The woman who walked away from someone who openly bragged about throwing millions at her like she was some kind of investment gone bad. The irony here is brutal. Simon thought speaking out would win him sympathy. That calling Porsha a mistake, a project, or a setup would frame him as the victim. But all it did was hand her receipts, solid, undeniable proof that his own ego and arrogance validated everything she was saying in court. When you step back and look at the big picture, it's almost tragic. Simon was trying to control the narrative, but every time he opened his mouth, he handed the power right back to Porsha. In the end, his biggest enemy wasn't Porsha's lawyers, the media, or even the $100 million lawsuit. His biggest enemy was himself. And while Simon was busy filing lawsuits and running his mouth in interviews, Porsha was left doing something that cut way deeper than any courtroom jab. She was starting over. On The Real Housewives of Atlanta, cameras caught a side of her that fans weren't used to. This wasn't the glamorous Porsha rolling up in the Rolls Royce, dripping in designer, and flashing that reality TV confidence. No, this was Porsha, the single mom, house hunting with her family, visibly anxious, trying to hold it together as the rug was ripped out from under her life. In one scene, she walks through a beautiful, spacious home, the kind of place you'd expect her to snap up in a heartbeat. But instead of gushing about chandeliers and walk-in closets, she looks around with hesitation. She asks about safety. She asks about schools. She's calculating, not for the cameras, not for the Instagram flex, but for her daughter's future. And in that moment, you realize this isn't just housewives drama. This is a woman figuring out where she and her child are going to sleep at night after losing the mansion, the roles, and the life she thought was permanent. It's heartbreaking because while Simon is painting her as some $5 million rehab project, the reality is far more raw. We're watching Porsha rebuild brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, episode by episode. The Bravo cameras that once showcased luxury are now documenting survival. Her family steps in, her mom, her sister. They walk those houses with her, trying to comfort her, trying to reassure her that this isn't the end. But you can see it in her eyes. She's scared. Not scared of losing fame, but scared of losing stability. For her daughter, for herself. And that's what makes this whole saga hit different. Because when you strip away the headlines, the lawsuits, the deportation scandals, and the Instagram shade, what you have is a woman being forced to start all over again in her late 30s. And for anyone who's ever had to pack up, move out, and rebuild after a breakup, you know that struggle is more than just TV. It's real. And that's why fans have rallied behind her. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about a $100 million lawsuit or who dragged who online. It became about resilience. About a woman who, no matter how messy her marriage or how shady her reality TV storylines, still has to wake up every morning, put on a brave face, and start over. Porsha's reality is bigger than Bravo. It's bigger than Simon's lawsuits. It's the universal story of losing it all and daring to rebuild anyway. When you zoom out, this isn't just a messy divorce anymore. It's a full-blown war. But the battlefield looks completely different depending on which side you're standing. On one end, you've got Simon, a man with a bruised ego, a deportation cloud hanging over him, and a $100 million lawsuit that feels more like a scorched earth campaign than a fair fight. He's not just fighting for money. He's fighting for his image, for his reputation, for the idea that he wasn't the fool in this marriage, that he wasn't the one played. Every lawsuit, every interview, every soundbite where he calls Porsha a rehab project is him trying to rewrite the story of how this all went down. And on the other end, you've got Porsha, no longer the woman in the Rolls or the mansion, but the single mom on Bravo, house hunting with her family, trying to rebuild. For her, this fight isn't about flexing an image. It's about survival. It's about making sure her daughter has a stable home, about proving that she's more than the shade Simon throws, about walking away from this war bruised but not broken. That's the contrast that makes this case so explosive, because Simon is swinging with lawsuits and interviews, while Porsha is just trying to stand on her feet again. One is obsessed with optics, the other is focused on stability. So the bigger question is this: who's really winning? Is it Simon, who might still have the money and the lawyers, but is bleeding credibility with every bitter word? Or is it Porsha, who may have lost the mansion and the lifestyle, but is gaining public sympathy by showing her struggle raw, unfiltered, and human? This isn't just about a $100 million divorce. It's about pride, survival, and who gets the last word when love turns into war. And maybe that's why fans are so divided. Some say Porsha played the game and is now crying victim when it didn't go her way. Others say Simon is exposing himself as the bitter, controlling man she claims he always was. So I'll leave it with you. Is Porsha justified in fighting for her survival, or is Simon the one being played in the biggest reality TV breakup of the decade?